It started on a gray Saturday morning, the kind where the air feels heavier than usual and silence carries a warning. The quiet streets of Brookridge, a small American town just outside Atlanta, were about to witness something that would shatter its image of calm forever. On that morning, Janice Porter, a single black mother of two, stood in her kitchen stirring sugar into her coffee, the faint hum of gospel music floating through the air. Her son, Malik, had just left for basketball practice, a bright 17-year-old with college scouts already watching him. He'd been her pride, her heartbeat, her reminder that all her sacrifices meant something. She didn't know that only 20 minutes later, he would be lying face down on cracked pavement, motionless, surrounded by police officers screaming commands he was too unconscious to hear. It began with a call. Suspicious black male in a hoodie. The dispatcher's voice crackled through police radios. That was all it took. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop near the corner of Jefferson and Pine. Malik, walking with his gym bag slung across his shoulder, fit the vague description. The officers claimed later that he resisted arrest. But the footage that would surface days later told another story, one that was soaked in blood, fear, and injustice. By the time paramedics arrived, Malik's pulse was faint. His brain was swelling. His future, the scholarship offers, the laughter, the life he hadn't yet lived, was slipping away. When Janice received the call from the hospital, her world collapsed. They told her son was in a coma, beaten so brutally that doctors couldn't promise he'd wake up. But it wasn't just the brutality that made national headlines. It was what happened next. An anonymous email, sent directly to the FBI, contained body cam footage that was mysteriously missing from the local police records. It showed every punch, every kick, every desperate plea Malik made before going silent. And within hours, federal agents arrived in Brookridge. For the first time in decades, the small-town police department found itself under federal investigation. What the FBI uncovered next would expose a web of corruption, cover-ups, and racism that reached far beyond one boy's beating. It would tear an entire system apart. Before the headlines, before the protests, before the FBI badges flooded the quiet streets of Brookridge, life for Janice Porter and her son Malik had been beautifully ordinary. Janice worked as a night shift nurse at St. Mary's Medical Center, known by her colleagues for her quiet strength and her ability to bring calm to chaos. After losing her husband to a workplace accident years earlier, she dedicated every ounce of her being to her children, Malik, 17, and his younger sister, Layla, 10. Their small, modest home sat on the edge of community that was slowly gentrifying. Rents were rising, new cafes and yoga studios were replacing corner stores, and Janice often wondered how long she could hold on. But despite the daily struggles, Malik's success had given her hope. He was a straight-A student, captain of his school's basketball team, and already caught the attention of recruiters from Georgia State and Clemson. He wasn't just talented. He was kind, humble, and determined to rise above the noise that swallowed so many young black men in small-town America. That morning had felt like any other. Malik had kissed his sister on the forehead, grabbed his gym bag, and jogged out the door with his usual grin. Janice remembered calling out after him, telling him to text when he got there. He never did. At 9:47 a.m., a 911 call came in reporting a suspicious male walking near the Brookridge Gas and Mart. The caller, later revealed to be a white store clerk, told dispatch that the young man seemed agitated and out of place. Malik had simply been checking his phone, waiting for his friend to pick him up. Within minutes, officers Greg Whitmore and Brian Keller, both veterans of the force, responded. By 10:05 a.m., Malik was unconscious. When Janice received the hospital call, the voice on the other end sounded clinical, detached. "Your son has sustained severe cranial trauma," the doctor said. "You need to come immediately." Her knees buckled, her coffee cup shattered, and the world tilted sideways. The drive to St. Mary's was a blur of red lights, shaky breaths, and silent prayers. She arrived to find Malik on a ventilator, his face swollen beyond recognition. Tubes and wires surrounded him, machines beeping in sterile rhythm. She wanted to scream. She wanted to believe it was a mistake. But the officer standing outside his room told her something that made her blood run cold. "Your son resisted arrest." That phrase, so casually delivered, would haunt her forever. Within hours, the official report hit local news. Teen suspect hospitalized after resisting arrest. Officers injured during struggle. The town of Brookridge barely blinked. For them, it was just another headline. But for Janice, it was the start of a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. That evening, she went to the police station demanding answers. She was met with cold stares and half-truths. No one could tell her where the body cam footage was. No one could explain why a routine stop had turned into a near-fatal beating. One officer even told her to calm down before threatening to arrest her for trespassing. She returned home broken, clutching Malik's old basketball jersey, crying until her body gave out. But what she didn't know was that across town, someone else had seen what happened. A rookie cop named Officer Perez, who had witnessed everything and couldn't live with what he'd seen. 2 nights later, he copied the footage from the department's secure server onto a flash drive. He sent it anonymously to the FBI's Civil Rights Division with a short message. This is not an isolated incident. They've been doing this for years. By the time the sun rose the next morning, FBI agents were on their way to Brookridge. The town that had always prided itself on being peaceful and law-abiding was about to be turned inside out. The streets that once felt familiar to Janice would soon be filled with cameras, protesters, and reporters demanding answers. For the first time, the town's deep cracks, the racism hidden behind polite smiles, the decades of unchecked police brutality, the silence of those who knew, were about to be exposed. And as Janice sat by her son's hospital bed, holding his hand, she made a silent promise. If Malik ever woke up, the world would know the truth about what they did to him. The next morning, the world outside Janice's hospital window no longer felt the same. Reporters were gathering near the hospital parking lot. Their cameras pointed toward the glass doors as if waiting for a glimpse of tragedy. Inside, Malik's room buzzed with the low hum of machines keeping him alive. Every beat of the monitor was both a comfort and a curse. Proof that he was still here, yet a reminder that he wasn't waking up. By 8 a.m., the FBI's black SUVs rolled into Brookridge. The town's police chief, Harold Deacon, watched for his office window, jaw tight. For 20 years, he'd run the department without oversight, his record spotless, at least on paper. He knew why they were there, and deep down, he knew they'd find what he'd spent years covering up. Inside the hospital, Special Agent Lisa Warren and her partner, Agent Marcus Hill, quietly introduced themselves to Janice. They didn't come with empty sympathy. Their tone carried purpose. Warren, a seasoned investigator from the FBI's Civil Rights Division, had seen too many towns like Brookridge, small communities that wore politeness like a mask while injustice festered beneath. They explained that they received an anonymous tip along with footage that had been deleted from police servers. The video, they said, was disturbing, far worse than what the local news had reported. They didn't show it to Janice yet. They wanted to verify the evidence and make an official move before releasing it to the press. But Janice saw the look in Agent Warren's eyes, a flicker of horror that told her everything she needed to know. Her son hadn't resisted. He'd been beaten, and those meant to protect him had nearly killed him. As word of the investigation spread, tension in Brookridge began to boil. Some residents defended the officers, insisting that the kid must have done something wrong. Others, mostly the black community on the South Side, rallied behind Janice, holding vigils and demanding justice. Signs reading "Justice for Malik" began appearing on fences and storefronts. Meanwhile, the FBI's investigation dug deep. They subpoenaed the police department's digital archives, interviewed officers, and combed through years of use-of-force reports. Patterns began to emerge. Dozens of complaints from black residents mysteriously lost, evidence misfiled, body cams malfunctioning. It was no coincidence. In the center of it all was Officer Greg Whitmore, the man who'd thrown the first punch. His record showed multiple prior complaints of excessive force, all dismissed by Internal Affairs. Every dismissal bore the signature of Chief Deacon himself. By the end of the week, the FBI executed a search warrant at the Brookridge Police Department. Computers were seized, files boxed up, and suddenly the once confident officers who had laughed off Janice's pain found themselves sweating under fluorescent lights. Chief Deacon called a press conference, his face pale and forced into a thin smile. "We have full faith in the federal process," he said. "Our department has nothing to hide." But behind that podium, he was scrambling. He knew that if the FBI uncovered the off-the-books reports, the ones documenting racial profiling, wrongful arrests, and manipulated footage, it wouldn't just end his career. It could send him to prison. That night, as Janice sat by Malik's bed, her phone buzzed with messages of support and anger. People she'd never met were offering donations, lawyers, and prayers. Yet all she wanted was her son's voice, the sound of him calling her Mom again. The world was rallying around his name, but Malik was still trapped in silence. Agent Warren visited her again, this time with something different in her voice. Determination. She told Janice that the footage was authentic, time-stamped, and unedited. It showed Malik raising his hands, dropping to his knees, saying he wasn't armed. Then, without provocation, Officer Whitmore lunged. The first hit knocked Malik to the ground. The second broke his jaw. The rest came like a storm, boots, fists, shouting. Keller joined in. At one point, Whitmore turned his body cam toward the street to hide what he was doing. When paramedics arrived, the officers were laughing. One of them said, "He'll live. Maybe he'll think twice next time." Janice wept as she listened, her grief transforming into something sharper, resolve. She realized she wasn't just Malik's mother anymore. She was his voice, and she was going to make sure the world heard him. The FBI's investigation widened beyond the assault. They discovered falsified evidence logs, doctor arrest reports, and racial bias training records that had never actually taken place. Brookridge's police department wasn't just negligent, it was corrupt to its core. Within 2 weeks, protests erupted across the state. Social media flooded with the hashtag Justice for Malik, and national news networks descended on the small town. Pressure mounted on the district attorney to file charges. But while the FBI worked carefully, the police union lawyered up. Whitmore and Keller were suspended without pay, but they were still walking free. The local community saw that as another slap in the face. On the 12th day after the beating, something unexpected happened. Malik moved. It was small, just a twitch of his fingers, but it was enough to make Janice drop to her knees in tears. Doctors called it a promising sign, but warned her not to get her hopes too high. Still, for Janice, it was the first light in a tunnel she thought had no end. That night, she wrote a letter, not to the police, not to the mayor, but to every mother who had ever lost a child to injustice. She posted online with Malik's picture and the words, "They thought they could silence my son, but they woke up an entire generation instead." The letter went viral overnight. Celebrities shared it. Activists quoted it. Donations poured in to fund Malik's medical care and the family's legal battle. Meanwhile, Agent Warren's team received a chilling new piece of evidence, a recording from a police department staff member who'd overheard Chief Deacon ordering Whitmore to keep the body cam footage off the record. It was clear now the cover-up was orchestrated. By the end of the third week, the FBI had enough to move. Arrest warrants were drafted, charges filed, and a federal indictment prepared. But Brookridge wasn't ready to accept it. Angry locals began protesting against the investigation, accusing the FBI of attacking good cops. The town split down the middle, justice on one side, denial on the other. As the sun set over the fractured community, Janice stood outside the hospital, watching the chaos unfold. Her son still lay in a coma, his future uncertain. But the system that tried to bury him was finally cracking open. The storm had just begun, and its most powerful moment was still to come. The town of Brookridge had become a battlefield, not of bullets, but of truth. Protesters filled the courthouse steps, chanting Malik's name while police lined the perimeter in riot gear, their faces blank behind plastic shields. News crews swarmed every corner. The once quiet streets now carried the sound of anger, heartbreak, and defiance. Inside the FBI field office, the tension was suffocating. Special Agent Lisa Warren and her team were preparing for the arrest that would shake the entire county. Evidence had been verified, the chain of command established. Every document pointed to one undeniable fact. Chief Harold Deacon and his officers had deliberately covered up a hate-fueled assault. At 6:15 a.m., under gray skies, The FBI made their move. Black SUVs fanned out across Brookridge. At Deacon's home, agents broke down his door while his wife screamed from the porch. Whitmore and Keller were taken into custody at their respective houses, handcuffed as neighbors watched in stunned silence. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. The same men who had once brutalized and intimidated others were now the ones being led away in chains. When the news broke, Brookridge erupted. Some cheered, others fumed. The mayor held an emergency press conference, her hands trembling as she condemned the unacceptable behavior of certain individuals and promised to cooperate with federal authorities. But the damage was done. The town's illusion of order had shattered. Janice watched it all unfold from the hospital waiting room, surrounded by reporters desperate for a statement. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her emotions were too raw, too conflicted. Her son was still lying motionless in that bed. Justice, no matter how loud, couldn't bring back the days she lost waiting for him to wake up. That evening, Agent Warren came to see her again. She looked exhausted but relieved. "We've charged them," she said quietly. "Assault under color of law, civil rights violations, conspiracy to obstruct justice. They're facing decades." Janice nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Then let's make sure everyone knows who Malik really is," she whispered. The next day, a vigil was held outside the hospital. Thousands showed up, families, activists, students, all holding candles and signs that read, "We see you, Malik." Drone cameras captured the sea of lights, a shimmering wave of unity that spread across social media in minutes. As the crowd sang softly, Janice stood by the window overlooking them. Malik's old basketball jersey folded in her hands. Every flicker of candlelight felt like a heartbeat, a reminder that her son's story had become something bigger than tragedy. It was movement. It was reckoning. Meanwhile, inside the federal courthouse, the arrested officers were being processed. Whitmore, his arrogance stripped away, stared blankly at the floor as he was fingerprinted. Keller muttered under his breath about betrayal, while Chief Deacon sat stone-faced, his career disintegrating before his eyes. When the FBI released a public statement detailing the investigation's findings, the nation gasped. The report exposed decades of misconduct. Falsified arrest logs targeting black residents, planted evidence, and fabricated charges dismissed quietly by the courts. The system hadn't just failed Malik. It had failed an entire generation. That night, as the vigil continued, something miraculous happened. Inside the dim hospital room, Malik's monitor began to beat faster. His fingers twitched. A nurse rushed in, calling for Janice. Janice froze, unable to breathe as she watched her son's eyelids flutter for the first time in nearly a month. His hand moved weakly in hers, and for a second she thought she was dreaming. The doctor came running, checking vitals, whispering urgent instructions. The crowd outside kept singing, unaware of what was happening inside, until hospital lights flickered, and someone in the crowd saw Janice through the window, sobbing and smiling at the same time. "Malik's awake," someone shouted. The words rippled through the sea of people like electricity. Cheers erupted, echoing across the night sky. Social media exploded within minutes. The boy who had been beaten into silence had finally opened his eyes, right as the men who hurt him were being held accountable. It felt like something greater than coincidence. News anchors called it a miracle of justice and faith. Activists called it the start of change. But for Janice, it was something simpler, purer. It was hope returning. Later that night, she sat by his bed, whispering softly to him as the world outside roared his name. She knew he couldn't respond yet, but she believed he could hear her. "You're safe now, baby," she murmured. "They can't hurt you anymore." In another part of town, Chief Deacon sat in a holding cell staring at the cold concrete floor. The sound of chants from outside the courthouse seeped faintly through the walls, a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Agent Warren filed the last of paperwork, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. She knew this case would change policies, spark reviews, maybe even push Congress to take notice. But in her heart, she also knew something else. Justice wasn't finished. The system that nearly killed Malik was still alive in too many other towns, too many other lives. As midnight approached, Brookridge stood divided between those who wanted to rebuild and those who refused to see. But one thing was undeniable. The silence had been broken, and in a hospital room filled with the steady rhythm of a heart monitor, a young black boy had opened his eyes, unknowing that his survival had already started a revolution. The morning after Malik opened his eyes, Brookridge felt different. The air outside the hospital was crisp, quiet, almost reverent. The chants had faded. The cameras had dimmed. But something deeper lingered. The heavy breath of a town realizing it could no longer pretend. Inside the hospital room, sunlight spilled across Malik's face, soft and warm. His eyes fluttered open slowly, unfocused, his mind still lost somewhere between dreams and reality. When he finally turned his head and saw his mother, a single tear rolled down Janice's cheek. She had waited 27 endless days for that moment. He couldn't speak. The tubes and swelling made it impossible, but his fingers moved weakly, tracing letters in the air. Mom. She leaned forward, clutching his hand as tears blurred her vision. I'm here, she whispered. I'm right here. News of Malik's awakening spread across the nation. What had begun as a tragedy had now become a symbol of survival, resilience, and justice long denied. Outside, people returned to light candles once more, this time not in grief but in gratitude. But the fight wasn't over. Weeks passed, and the federal case against Chief Deacon, Whitmore, and Keller moved swiftly. The FBI's evidence was airtight. Body cam footage, deleted records, and internal memos showing a pattern of racial targeting. The Department of Justice classified the case under civil rights violations resulting in bodily harm. Courtroom after courtroom, America watched. Janice attended every hearing, sometimes sitting silently in the front row, sometimes holding the hands of other mothers who had lost sons of their own. When the footage of Malik's beating was finally played for the court, even hardened journalists turned away. The sound of the officers' laughter, the thud of fists, the plea for mercy, it silenced the entire room. In the end, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Officer Greg Whitmore was sentenced to 32 years in federal prison. Brian Keller received 28. Chief Harold Deacon, who had orchestrated the cover-up for years, was handed a 40-year sentence for conspiracy, obstruction, and falsifying reports. The courtroom erupted in a mix of tears and relief. As the judge read the sentences, Janice bowed her head. She didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She simply breathed for the first time in months, a long, trembling breath that felt like release. Justice, imperfect as it was, had finally spoken, but what came next mattered even more. The FBI's findings triggered a national review of small-town police departments with repeated civil rights complaints. Federal grants were frozen, policies rewritten, and mandatory body cam audits became law in several states. Malik's case, once buried under a false resisting arrest report, became a catalyst for reform. Documentaries were made. Schools invited Janice to speak. She told them she wasn't a hero, just a mother who refused to let her child's pain be erased. The system breaks when we stay silent, she would say, her voice steady and fierce. So speak, even when they try to scare you into silence. Through months of therapy, Malik slowly regained his speech and motor function. His smile returned, though faint, and he began to walk again with the help of crutches. His first steps drew applause from doctors and nurses who had once doubted he'd ever move again. Each step was a victory against the cruelty that tried to end him. One afternoon, as he sat by the hospital window, he asked his mother to hand him his old basketball. His fingers trembled as he gripped it, the familiar weight grounding him. One day, he whispered hoarsely, I'm going to play again. Janice smiled through her tears. And when you do, she said softly, the whole world will be watching. Months later, when Malik was discharged, Brookridge held a unity march. For the first time, white and black residents walked side by side. They carried banners that read, Never again and Justice lives here. The same streets where he'd been beaten were now covered in chalk drawings from children, hearts, peace signs, and the words for Malik. Janice didn't lead the march. She walked quietly near the back, her hand resting on her son's shoulder as he moved slowly, determined, step by step. The world had seen enough of his pain. Now it would witness his strength. The FBI eventually closed the case with a statement calling it a landmark moment in accountability. But for Janice, the true victory was more personal. It was seeing her son breathe without machines. It was hearing him laugh again. It was knowing that the system that nearly stole him had been forced to face itself. Months later, Malik stood on the stage of his high school auditorium, his voice shaky but sure as he addressed his classmates. "I don't remember every second of what happened," he said, "but I remember waking up and realizing the world didn't give up on me." The crowd stood in silence before erupting into applause. He looked toward his mother, who was crying in the front row, and smiled. "They tried to take my voice," he said, "but you gave it back." When the ceremony ended, Janice stood outside under the same gray sky where it all began. Only now, the clouds were breaking apart, sunlight pouring through. She knew Malik's road ahead would be long, but she also knew he wasn't walking it alone. Across the nation, people were still saying his name. Hashtag Justice for Malik had become hashtag Rise with Malik, a campaign funding scholarships for young people pursuing criminal justice reform. Out of pain had come purpose. Out of silence had come strength. As night fell, Janice whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, not for what had been lost, but for what had survived: Malik, the truth, and the courage of those who refused to look away. For the first time in a long time, the world didn't just see a victim. It saw a survivor.